I am hoping that more people come. I'm Cindy Harris. I am the Volunteer Services Supervisor for Grapevine Parks and Rec, and I help oversee volunteers and programming for Keep Grapevine Beautiful. Jeray Moore is here. She's part of Keep Grapevine Beautiful's board. If anybody has any questions about the organization, feel free to talk to one of us afterwards. Just a real quick question. How many of you in this room are concerned about water conservation? Just off the top. There you go, Dustin. This is Dustin Compton. He works for Trinity River Water District. I don't know if you guys remember during COVID we did he was one of our guinea pigs for our virtual presentations, and he did Water is Awesome. So we are happy to have him with us tonight. And so we wanted to just find out how many of you are concerned about water conservation. This is another reason why you're here tonight, right? Is because you probably have a residential irrigation system and you need to know more about it. We clearly have professionals in the house. I have this stuff, but it's all underground at my house. So I hope you guys learn everything that you would like to this evening, but I feel like we're in really good hands. We have Matthew Dildy from Dildy Irrigation and Consultation, and then Patrick Wallace, who is the Vice President of Lone Star Irrigation Association, and they work with Trinity River Water District to help residents and businesses know how to better manage their water and irrigation systems. And so I'm going to turn this over to them, and I want you guys to ask questions as you're comfortable or as Matthew is comfortable. And thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
So we're going to be respectful of everybody's time. This is scheduled for about an hour and a half. I can tell you it takes months to train a irrigation tech. So up front, what I typically always ask is we're going to take about 5 minutes. Our dry erase aren't working too well, but if any of y'all, nobody signs up for a class like this unless you might have a specific issue or specific question. So we're going to take about 5 minutes because there's so much we can cover. I want to make sure if you came in here with a question tonight that we are trying admirably to answer that. So just raise your hand if there's a specific question you had. I'm going to take a note, and we'll what we'll do is we'll have the presentation go over water conservation and why this is important. Some basic stuff to know about your irrigation system and reading your water meter. But aside from that, we'll circle back to those questions towards the end in a little bit more hands-on portion. So does anybody have a specific, okay. So I'm gonna start with Greenship here.
If we're putting a new system in, what should we look for in our contractor?
Okay. What to look for in a contractor if installing a new system?
Yes.
Okay, I saw another hand at the back.
If I want to change out a zone to like a drip.
Okay. So basically you've got a spray zone now, you'd like to convert to drip line, okay?
Yes, sir.
Or it's better to do cycles rather than, say, 30 minutes split into two so that you get more soakage.
We will talk about, so that terminology for us would be cycle and soak. The answer to that is yes, but we will get into more detail on that. So cycle and soak.
Yes, sir.
Locating the valves in the area.
Okay, valve location. And I saw, yes, sir.
Basics, how to fix the leak.
How to fix a leak, basically how to do a solvent weld on PVC, which I have everything prepared up here to do that today. I will say towards the end of the class, we've only got about an hour and a half, but towards the end, we'll leave a little bit of time to kind of display that. We'll go through some basic head adjustment, but we will show solvent weld toward the end.
Which are the best kind of head? Rotating or spray?
Which are the best kind of heads? So during the presentation, we will go over that a little bit. It's really application based. I have some preferences, Patrick has some preferences, and we'll go over those. But it really, there's some areas that some work and some areas that they may not work as well.
Yes, ma'am.
If you think you've got a leak, you've got it turned off at the control.
Okay.
We asked you this one. You've got it turned off at the control, but the area is still very wet. Is there somewhere else, the valve area, you can turn it off, or is there anything else you can do? Besides getting on your.
Certainly will. And then we'll talk about, now controllers, they will turn the power off to the, when you turn that off, that'll stop the power to the valves, the solenoids that opens and closes. But you probably have a leak in a pipe underground, and we'll talk about where those shut-offs for you generally are going to be found. Yes, ma'am, and the rest.
Okay, I was wondering at what height should you cut your grass? What's the best height for, so it doesn't fry in the summer?
For grass cutting. Okay, I saw, yes, ma'am.
Where do you go if you can't, if there's no manual with your water sprinkler system and it's so old you can't find it on the internet? Like who do you contact or where do you go for something like that? And I can't find anyone right now, so.
Would you by chance, and that may be something we talk about maybe towards the end,
Yeah.
if you have time to step up here, do you have a picture of it, or do you have the model number by chance?
I may have a picture of it. I'll have to go, I'll have to.
You'd be amazed how many, they're obscure, but you usually can find them online. I'm not saying you haven't looked, but it would have to be pretty old for you to not
I
have
found
them.
a forum that said, well, it used, but anyway, they were kind of backward.
Yeah, let's talk, if you're still around towards the end, let's talk about that, and I'll see if I can help you with that.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, sir.
Where to start if you've had a system in the yard for several years, don't know anything about it, never turned it on? Is there like a cycle up kind of routine to do or something to that effect?
You know that it's operational and just haven't used it?
Well, I don't know anything about it, I just know it's down there.
Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about how, we'll talk about how wires go out of the controller to the valves. It may be that wire has been broken, or you do have to be careful if a zone has not been turned on in a long time. What you can sometimes have is you can get it to pop on, but then you can't get that valve to shut back off. And that's where you have the nightmare of going to work in the morning and the zone's running and you get home at the end of the day and it's still running. We'll talk about that a little bit. We can talk about what you need to look for and what to expect when you do get it operational again. One more question and then we'll move on. But I want to say that we will have opportunity for questions a little bit later.
Is there a way to find those heads so we have an area that is not watered and we know there is a sprinkler somewhere? So besides digging the whole yard to find it, is there a way to?
How to find, basically, you know the head's there, it's
It
just
should
buried
be there
and long
because
lost.
it's not being watered, and how do you find it?
Okay. Okay. So we've got a good list of questions that we will circle back to. So just so you know, this is sponsored by Tarrant Regional Water District and the City of Grapevine. Tarrant Regional Water District, they're the main water purveyors. They're the ones that manage and basically sell the water to the individual municipalities that then you buy and use to put water on your lawn. Tarrant Regional Water District, their main focus is managing those peaks and valleys of demand, making sure there's enough water on hand for everybody. And that's why they have water conservation programs, because we're going to get to a slide here in a little bit about how much DFW is growing. So it can't always be about just building another lake. There has to be a conservation aspect to that as well. My name is Matthew Dildy. As Ms. Harris said, I am state licensed. I started in irrigation at 16 at Diamond Oaks Golf Course in Altum City. I got my license at 18, 19, basically 2000. So I'm not that old, but I'm an old fart as far as the industry is concerned. I've done nothing but residential service, irrigation repair. Ran a lot of service departments. I've been doing this a long time. I currently do system evaluations, no-charge system evaluations that are sponsored again by Tarrant Regional Water District and by the City of Grapevine that anyone can sign up for. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But in essence, you'll have a licensed irrigator come out to your house, run through your whole system. They're there as an unbiased assessor, simply to give you as much information and data as they can about the system, as far as primary focus being saving water. Whether that be misaligned heads, broken stuff, also coverage issues, stuff like that. And that's what I do full time. Patrick Wallace, I'll let you introduce yourself, man.
Again, Patrick Wallace, I'm a licensed irrigator. My number is not quite as old as him.
but I have 15 years of experience in the industry. I have ran other people's companies. I ran my own company. I successfully sold my company as well just this last year. I'm the current vice president for the Lone Star Irrigation Association. I'm also the irrigation director for TNLA's Region 5. So between both of us, we have a wealth of knowledge that we're here to help you as the homeowners to be able to help you understand a little bit more about your system and how we can help you conserve some water. And again, there's lots of different irrigators in this world. There's the fix-it guys. I would say that he and I are not necessarily fix-it guys. We know how to repair anything, but we really lean into, Patrick even more so than me, stuff that will, cutting edge technology stuff, whether it be nozzles, heads, pressure reduction, stuff that's available to help save water. You know, if we're dealing with a homeowner and we're there to fix a head, we might also talk about ways that you can save water on that zone. The guys that take the extra step. So general agenda for today, we're going to do a Tarrant Regional Water update. These are just things we're going to get through before we get to the hands-on. We are going to go over some irrigation programming if anybody has any questions about that. Now there's a whole host of irrigation controllers out there. Everything that y'all have in this room is not necessarily represented here, but these are some very common brands and some very common models that most of you probably would recognize. So we'll talk about cycling, but we'll get into programming. We'll talk about spray heads and rotors, the difference between them, adjustment on both of them, repair for both of them, different nozzles that can go either in the rotors or on the spray heads, valves. This is a standard 1-inch residential valve, so for every zone in your yard that turns on, there's one of these somewhere out in the yard. They may long be lost and buried, but they are there. And we'll talk about the general internal function of those and how you can diagnose those and get those cleaned up and operational again. Solvent welding, we'll get into that towards the tail end as far as how to actually solvent weld PVC pipe together if you're daring enough to dig and get a leak fixed yourself. Drip irrigation we'll touch on briefly and drip conversions. We'll talk about the evaluation program, and then that's that for that slide. Let's see. So Ben Franklin said we only know the value of water when the well runs dry. Again, that's why conservation is such an important aspect of what we're doing here. This is kind of I would call it a dumbed down map, but it's not, it's actually pretty accurate of what Tarrant Regional Water District manages. Those are the reservoirs. So main mission is water supply, flood control, and recreation. People sometimes don't worry if their water runs low, but if they can't put a boat on the lake, they get really upset about it. So one other thing I will mention, if there's anything up here that some stuff like this might be worth taking a photo of, because we don't provide any flyers or anything, but that SaveTarrantWater.com is a great place to get some advice on how often to water your system. It also has some native planting stuff. You can also sign up for the no charge assessment as well through there. So we talked about DFW's population and where it's headed. This is TRWD's estimation by 2060. We're doubling, so that's where you can't build enough lakes. It has to be conservation on one side of it as well. TRWD extends the life of existing supplies, meets the demands of growing population, delays the need for expensive new supplies, makes more water available during drought, and reduces peak demands. Speaking of peak demands, that's where a lot of you will see that recommendation, depending on your address, that you run even or odd days. For even addresses, that's going to be Wednesday and Saturday. For odd addresses, that's going to be Thursday, Sunday. 2 days a week, even during the summertime. And what that does is it just evens out that peak demand of supply of water that's needed. So this is something that a lot of people don't take into consideration. During the summer, I would say that 25% is very much on the low end unless you have a lot of drip on your sprinkler system. I see a lot more systems, especially in Grapevine, with some older homes that easily 60% of your water during the summertime is going towards keeping the lawn green. There's nothing in the house that's gonna use as much water as what you're using outside. The average irrigation zone is going to run anywhere between 10 and 20 gallons a minute. The average American bathtub is 40 to 50 gallons. So, I mean, you're filling multiple bathtubs every day that you run that system. A well-adjusted, efficient irrigation system will provide healthier plant material. Shorter irrigation run times. We'll talk about some coverage and uniformity. One thing that I see lots of times is people are, maybe their system's functional, but their head spacing is really wide and we don't have what we call head-to-head coverage. Or it's an older system and they've mixed and matched heads and you end up with some really poor coverage uniformity, and the only recourse is to increase your run times to make up for that. That's where uniformity and coverage are important. Less water, less waste, lower irrigation bills, use less fertilizer and pesticides. The question about how high to mow your grass, when I ran commercial landscape and maintenance companies, if the client was amenable to it, it was not uncommon for me to have my guys mow it as high as possible, 3 3/4, 4 inches if possible, but you have to be able to walk through it. The thing about it is kind of like my bald head in the summertime. I think you've got a bald head too. The thicker you can keep your turf grass, the less opportunity weeds have. Weeds is just a chase for sunlight. If you've got your grass cut very short and an opportunity for weed seeds to get germinated and then sprout and get some sunlight, you're going to be fighting. You're going to be using more herbicides. Also, thicker turf grass protects that soil layer, so the water that you do put down with your irrigation tends to stay available to that grass longer. If you want to keep your yard cut like a practice green at the golf course, you're welcome to, but you will be watering more than anybody else. High pressure. We've all been conditioned to believe, and you said, what pressure did you see today?
125.
125. 125 PSI. So we've all been kind of conditioned to believe that this is what a sprinkler system should look like. It is not. This is an overpressured system. Most of these rotors and spray heads operate best. The nozzles that are on them, the best rating and radius you're going to get out of them is about the 30 to 40 PSI range. Most systems that I encounter are overpressured. I'd say, well, I don't know if most. Would you concur with that, or?
It just depends on your, I look at it more as a design aspect. You're gonna have some pressure losses within the system before it gets to the heads. When you're seeing that, it's because of really high pressure. At 65 to like 80, you're gonna see a little bit, but it's once you go over that 80 threshold that you really start seeing the misting, and all that is to me, I just see dollars floating away. It's a lot of evaporation.
Yeah, your water's just atomizing at that high pressure. And again, in Grapevine, a lot of y'all are dealing with older residential systems, and the thought process a long time ago was more pressure, more better. But if you actually, if one of the probably the most cost-effective means to implement some water conservation on your property and get better uniformity is pressure reduction. There's several ways that can be done. You can do that at each individual head, each individual valve, or you can do it at one location at the tie-in for the sprinkler system. If you can change this scenario, right, in this scenario, probably 50–60% of that water that they think is going on the yard is simply floating away. And that happens very commonly on systems that were installed in the 80s and 90s.
Where do you check the pressure?
You can check it at your hose bib. Now, there is one caveat to that.
Is it the same as their irrigation system?
Typically, yes. There are some houses that plumbers have installed pressure reducers on the house, so it doesn't give you, but that's not all of them by any means. Most houses, you can check it usually at your front hose bib, and that's going to give you a pretty good idea of, that's with all the water off. We're looking for static pressure. That'll give you an idea of where your pressure stands. He mentioned design. If a system is designed correctly and the zones are large enough, what happens is you start out with a static pressure. Once you put a load on that meter and you start flowing water, if you're flowing enough water, that pressure will drop to what we call dynamic or working pressure. If the system's designed correctly, then this is not an issue. But a lot of y'all have smaller zones, and they are, again, irrigators liked that pressure back in the day, far more than they do now. All of y'all are here because you've looked at your sprinkler systems. That one broken head could easily be pumping out 10, 15 gallons a minute. So we recommend that, you know, hire a licensed irrigator if you're more comfortable doing that, to have someone inspect your system. But don't be scared on a nice warm Saturday to put your flip-flops on. And most new modern controllers have a 2-minute test function in which you can run a 2-minute test, which is about the right amount of time to walk from one zone to the next. I'd recommend walking through your sprinkler systems at least a couple times during the summer. Because these systems are usually programmed to go on so early in the morning that you're not going to be aware of that, and that's where you get the $400, $500, $600 water bill, and then you find the problem after the fact. So definitely, you know, be engaged and walk your system if at all possible. Water only when required. Again, we talked about those even and odd days. Also, if we get enough rainfall that week, that SaveWater.com. Also, what was the other website?
Water is awesome.
Water is awesome. There's a lot of sites that you can sign up for a free subscription in which they will send you a weekly update based on how much rainfall we've had. They will tell you whether you even need to run your system at all. The golden rule in the summer is, and I emphasize in the summer, is that we want to put about 1 inch of water down per week, unless Mother Nature supplies otherwise. And that's both for your shrubs and turf. 1 inch of water will, yeah, there you go, will generally penetrate soil to a depth of 6 inches. Water slowly for better absorption. Never water on windy days. Again, we just want to keep that water on your property. We're not paying to keep your neighbor's yard green. Water early in the morning to reduce that evaporation. Maintain a 2 to 4 inch mulch layer in the flower and ground cover beds, just to keep that water in the soil and plant available. This is a big thing. Water newly planted flowers or shrubs individually. So if you do plant anything new, the fallback is people will turn that whole zone on. You know, they don't want to get out there and hand water their new shrubs, so they'll water 500, 1,000 square feet of property when only 1 or 2 plants need water. You're oversaturating everything else. For the first few weeks, it is very beneficial to actually get out there with the water hose and hand water anything new that you have in. Once it's established, then the sprinklers can take it from there. Water without creating runoff, that goes back to the cycle and soak. And then if you might want to take a picture of this, Patrick and I both highly recommend, rather than going to Home Depot or Lowe's for your irrigation parts and material, these in the red down here are our local irrigation warehouses. That's where guys like he and I buy irrigation material. They're going to have anything and everything you could possibly want. You're going to have somebody behind the counter that knows what they're talking about. Generally, you're not going to get wholesale pricing, but you're probably going to get a better price than you would at Home Depot. And they are more than happy to help. I would recommend, though, as homeowners, if you have the availability, go in there after about 9 or 10 a.m. in the morning. They get all the contractors first thing in the morning. After that, usually they're pretty empty and more than happy to help.
Where are they located mostly?
There are so many through the Metroplex that it's hard to say, hey, the closest one to like here, there's a site one over off of South Lake Boulevard.
Longhorn is behind Brahms on
Yeah,
Northwest
I'm not
Highway.
on Northwest Highway.
So you guys know, yeah.
So, but there are so many different locations. Site one probably has the most in DFW. There's probably 30 locations spread throughout. Each of these are, some of them are large. Longhorn's not as large, but these are, they are there. Again, they do have very knowledgeable people. They're gonna have everything that you need. Home Depot has like one nozzle type, and that's it. And your yard is different in all aspects that you need different types of nozzles. So we just recommend going to an actual distributor versus Home Depot.
And if my big head is in the way for anybody who wants to get a photo, just tell me to Doug. This gets into controller programming, seasonal adjustment. Again, most new modern controllers have something either called seasonal adjustment or seasonal budget, seasonal percentage. Here, I'll get my big head out of the way. Also, cards that I put out on each of y'all's chairs, the black and white one pertains to this. That seasonal adjustment, once you have a base program in your controller, that is a percentage change that you can make to your controller so that you can easily make seasonal adjustments to your controller without having to reprogram the runtime on each individual zone. As you can see though, the critical thing here is we typically, we've got recommendations throughout the year, but like this year, I haven't even started my system yet. As long as we are getting weekly rain and it stays relatively cool, leave it off. But early, it's a bell curve. Early in the springtime, maybe we do need to start running a little water, but we don't need to be running the full 100% that zone is programmed for. Rather than 20 minutes on that rotor zone, maybe it only needs to be running 10. It needs to be running about 50% of that. So most modern controllers on the dial somewhere or somewhere in the features, you will have something called a seasonal budget or seasonal adjustment. And then that way, once you've got a base program in there that you're comfortable with and that you like, you can just adjust that percentage throughout the year to accommodate this bell curve that we expect.
Hey Matt, real quick.
Yep.
I was just let known by our wonderful host here that that everybody that attended, that she's gonna send out this presentation to everybody.
Okay, so forget the photos. Thank you. Just make sure she has your email. And as I just said, hey, if it's raining, leave the sprinklers off. Sprinklers are great, but that water has been cleaned and prepared and made ready for drinking, not necessarily for watering plant material. So there is some stuff in there. I always joke that I can run sprinklers and we can be on a regular program, but if you get one good 1-inch rainfall, that your plant, you can tell a difference. Rain is different.
Matt, have you ran your sprinkler system?
Not yet, not yet.
I have not turned mine on yet this year because of the amount of rainfall that we have received has been enough.
Yeah, yeah. And our clay soil will lock up and hold a lot of water for a long time.
Unless you're in that one part of Arlington.
Unless you're in that one part of Arlington. So I'm trying to remember what kind of water meter Grapevine has. It may be a mix. This is an analog water meter. The reason why we're showing this is as the consumer, you have a right to understand how this works. At the top, you'll have your total usage over the lifetime of the meter. This little red dial here is a flow indicator. Whether it be analog or a digital meter, there's going to be some kind of flow indicator, which is going to show any active flow. You said you had a leak in particular. You'd asked me about when you got here. You should be able to open that meter up, whether it's digital or analog, and you should be able to pull up that flow, and it will tell you exactly, usually to the hundredth of the gallon, how much that leak is costing you. I thought I saw a hand.
We did have a question about identifying a leak. Your meter can help you identify a leak on both your home and your actual irrigation system, because you can use, which is below the actual meter is your backflow device. If you turn that off and your meter's still moving, that tells you that you have a leak on your home side of your system. If it's not moving and it's off and you turn it back on and it starts to move, it's gonna tell you you have a leak on your irrigation
So
side.
I have to turn the backflow on.
And where's that?
Where's the backflow?
The backflow, and there's a picture of it here. This is, I believe that's a Watts, or that's an
It's
Apollo.
Apollo, yeah.
That's down in the where the water.
That's usually going to be relatively close to where your water meter is located out at the curb. They will occasionally also be located, they're going to be in a green rectangular box with a green lid.
Oh, you're talking about the sprinkler valve?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay, I done that now.
That's
But I
where
couldn't see any tapping or anything in there, just mud.
it is possible. So you see this one, you see how, and we'll get to that in a minute. We're the only state in the union that puts DCAs below grade.
Yes.
Yeah. The manufacturers of these actually recommend putting these above grade, but we put them in the ground. The downside to that is your handles end up looking like this, or they're completely rusted away. You might need to do a little bit more due diligence. Is it really mucky in there? And
Really mucky.
you may need to dig it out. Your handles may still be there,
Okay.
but it is entirely possible they have rusted off. So we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But
And then you call the people up.
yes,
Yes, sir.
So I have a system called Ion Water, it reports every hour. Is Grapevine converting to that, Ion Water system?
converting to smart meters.
they are
Yeah, that's
converting.
it.
Yeah, and that's why I said I know that Grapevine's kind of a mix, because they are in process of converting. So ultimately, if you don't have a digital meter now, you ultimately will, and that will provide a live feed to the city and probably either an app or a website that you can sign up to and get live data.
It tells me that I can set the leak rate,
Mhm.
I want reported back to me.
Yeah, yeah. It's gonna be very similar to that. It may not refresh quite as often as the Ion Water, but it's still a cool tool to have.
So when you have a leak, that little red wheel up there, if you think you have everything shut off, if that little red wheel is spinning, then you've got a leak.
You have a leak.
Okay, you got a
And
leak.
it may not be spinning, you may have to
It
stare
may
at
be a
it
slow
for just a
rotation.
little bit, but you'll see it just kind of.
But it will move, it will move to some degree.
Yeah, and one trick I used to do if it wasn't moving very quickly is I would take a black Sharpie or a paint pen and I'd mark the point that it's at and then come back to it about 10 minutes later, assuming everything stayed off. It should still be right on that paint mark. If it moved, then there is water moving somewhere. And to his point, you can isolate that by shutting off the backflow if you have handles, and then you can isolate that from your house versus the sprinkler system. The backflow in particular is really the main reason why we have a licensed irrigation trade in the state of Texas. This is another example of a type of meter you can see. In this one, your flow indicator is that little silver and black bit in the middle. It will spin, but there's always going to be some kind of indicator of any flow. This is commonly what you'll see a backflow look like in the ground. This one, by the way, is not testable, as you know. But the reason why these are important, it's more than just a shutoff. There are two check valves in here. Once water is in the sprinkler system, it's no longer considered potable. If you've ever turned your sprinkler system on in the springtime after having it off all winter, keep your mouth closed. There's all kinds of nasty stuff, because what can happen is these heads can back siphon all the junk that's in the dirt and the surrounding grass, the fertilizer, and then you've got a perfect environment for bacteria and other stuff to grow. So this prevents any of that water backflowing into your domestic line or into the larger domestic line for the neighborhood as a whole. In other states, it requires a licensed plumber to install these. In the state of Texas, a licensed irrigator can put these in. That's the only two, a licensed plumber or a licensed irrigator. And then once they are installed, they have to be tested by a backflow tester to ensure that sometimes even new ones fail. Do you know what the percentage on new failures?
It's very low on that failure.
Yeah.
I'm also a licensed backflow tester through the state. I run across these all the time, that you're just unable to test them. And we have to report that back, and usually that entails having to replace them. It's not a very cheap item to replace either.
Not cheap.
You're looking at, a good licensed contractor, you're looking in between probably $900 and upwards of $1,500.
So you have one of those in every zone?
No.
Just one at the beginning.
Just one at the main connection for the sprinkler system as a whole.
So if you hire a licensed contractor, you must also make sure he has the backflow licensing at the same time.
No, so that is kind of tricky. The backflow license is only for testing. So there's guys that specialize in, they won't necessarily put a shovel to the ground and fix your heads. They're just there to test this to make sure it is functioning correctly. And that is mandatory when a new one is put in. Yeah, oh.
In the commercial side, they are tested every year. So the home, residential in most cities is only tested upon installation. Unless you live in the city of Benbrook, then they test, I think it's every 3 years, that they have a person on staff that all he does all year round is test every single device in the city.
And I don't know if residential testing is coming. There's going to be a lot of backlash because most people's backflows are going to, if your handles are rusted off, it's a fail. If your test cocks, these are called the test cocks, if they're pointed to the side, it will be a fail. And then you're looking at a new one, and it's if you want a sprinkler system, it's mandatory. So I don't know if residential testing is ever coming. We'll find out.
Not this legislative session.
No. One thing I do tell people, and he can disagree with me if he likes, I do actually tell people, if your handles are intact and maybe just a little bit corroded or brand new, I generally tell people maybe once or twice a year, put a dollop of grease on those handles, not WD-40, but sometimes I even recommend tacky automotive grease. Something that is going to make that handle kind of mucky, but it will keep that corrosion from occurring. Do you recommend anything like that?
Marine grease.
Marine grease.
You know, if you have a trailer grease for your bearings, you know, just whatever you have available. You can get a small tube of it, or if you're like me, I have 2 trailers, and then I have a silly boat. Those don't get a boat. Maintenance, super fun. No, I take that and I put marine grease onto it, and it definitely has made it outlast a regular one.
We have a host of these controllers. Actually, I think I've got all of those up
You
there.
have all of these?
Rainbird and Hunter have both been in the game for a long time. I'm not a brand fanboy. If you're looking at a new controller, either one of these would be very good options. They're robust controllers. They have good warranties on them that they will honor, especially if you buy it from one of those wholesalers that we talked about. If it fails within that warranty period, you just take it right back to them and they will hand you a new one, as long as it's within that warranty period. But the main thing we wanted to convey here is they are all very similar in design, with that center dial and a lot of the functions being very similar. That layout is very understandable and intuitive for homeowners. Slightly lower on the tier, but still not a bad controller. Orbit has been around for years. Some of y'all may have some Orbits. These are typically the kind of controllers you can buy at a Home Depot or Lowe's. I have nothing against them. They are genuinely cheaper, but you're not going to see the same service life out of those controllers. I think they're pretty easy to program. I do think Orbit is upping their game a little bit. This is a Wi-Fi entirely based, app-based controller, this Beehive. So at that point, once you put it on the wall and you move your wires over to it, this becomes a controller you run entirely from your phone. It takes all the brains out of it. I think that's a pretty slick controller.
Very similar to the Ratio controller. So.
What is the normal lifespan of these things, these controllers about?
I would call these Orbits about a 10-year controller. I mean, that is me making a broad spectrum statement.
I understand that.
The Rainbirds and Hunters prior to that, I've seen them hanging on the wall for 20, 25 years. If anything, they get replaced because the functionality gets outdated and maybe there's some new technology available. But lots of times I'm replacing those not because they've gone bad, but just because the homeowner wants something maybe a little bit more legible or something with some new features.
On the regular, I see, I know where to read the date codes, and I inform anybody that I do the evaluation for, as I show them the date code, like, this one's kind of old, I think one of them today was 2006. So it's still functional, still running like it should, so, you can expect a lot of time out of a good controller. So even out of those, you're gonna get a good amount of, warranty out of it.
Patrick had mentioned Ratio. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but these guys are absolutely eating the market up right now. I've seen them take over about 30% of the market just in the last 2 or 3 years. They were a techie group out of Colorado that looked at current controllers and said, we can do better than that. The thing about it is their controller is pretty robust. There's nothing really to interact with on the faceplate. Everything is on the app, and their app is very intuitive for homeowners that are maybe not comfortable with setting all that up. It's a very slick app to use. Those are great controllers. So if you're considering one of those, now I do think those guys you said they sold out, and now Amazon owns them.
I believe Amazon bought Ratio, but that's what happens with companies that develop cool technology. They get gobbled up by bigger companies.
But I've only heard of one warranty issue on these, and that gentleman was sent a new controller within a week. So if you're looking at a controller these are what we call smart adjusting or ET controllers. They will take both past rainfall and predictive rainfall and weather forecasts from your closest local weather station to your house, and they will either daily, weekly, or monthly automatically adjust the run times for that controller for each zone. As long as you have it loaded correctly, it's going to ask you stuff like how much slope you have, how much shade, is this turf or shrubs. Once you get all that set up, then the controller will take over from there and start adjusting on its own. The one caveat to that is a lot of our cities, and we talked about the two a week watering. That does need to be taken into account. These ratios do like to flex a little bit they like about 4 days a week to work within. But even at the 2 days a week, they still offer a lot of features like rain delay. They'll stop if the wind is too much. And then of course they also have the feature if we've had enough rain that week, they will just skip the run for you. But you can see all of that on the calendar.
Do they have to be installed by a licensed?
No. No, this controller is 3 screws to put on the wall. And what I tell people to do is, I'll have a diagram here in a bit of what it looks like when the wires are inside your controller. Usually, sometimes they'll be color coded. So if you want it to stay in the sequence that it's in, take a photo of the wires on the old controller before you remove them, if they're color coded. So that way you put them right back in the same order that they were on the ratio. And then all the brain power comes in on the actual setting up the app and just getting familiar with that. The hardware is not hard to install.
And they have specials at Costco all the time. They have specials on the internet, Ratio itself on their website. So, you know, they're trying to promote the smart controller, which does bring in a lot of the conservation-based technologies too.
Again, we talked about Orbit and Beehive. They're doing the same thing. One thing I don't have a slide for, if y'all want to look at it, these Rainbird controllers are very popular. There's a lot of them out there, and if you have a newer model, Rainbird offers what's called a Link LKN or LNK module. So this is a Wi-Fi module that will take your conventional controller and turn it into a Wi-Fi controller that you can run from an app. But the critical point to that is it does need to be a newer, I don't know when they started releasing those, within the last 5-6 years.
If it's based on like Hunter did the same thing, but they have a faceplate replacement to do it. It is like 2017-ish where you can convert a faceplate, get a Wi-Fi smart replacement, and just switch the plates out, and it just becomes a smart Wi-Fi controller.
Rain-free sensors, this happens to be Hunter's. Rain-free sensors, if you have a conventional controller, are, in my opinion, an absolute must. So what this is going to do, and in fact, they're mandatory on all new systems in the state of Texas. This is going to hang, you'll see them on gutters lots of times, long and forgotten. I tend to hang them on fences, where if you need to service it, you don't have to break your neck on a ladder. Hunter makes a great rain sensor. What this does is if that sensor simulates about 1/4 inch of rainfall, it will prevent that controller from cycling until that sensor dries out. That could be 48 to 72 hours, depending on what the weather's like the following days. And it's completely passive for you. So after that sensor dries out, the controller will go right back to its normal programming and cycle normally. Likewise, almost all of them now include freeze sensors. So if you drop below 37 degrees this fall and you forget to turn your controller off, it'll also prevent that controller from running. It'll ignore any program that you have set. These are great. The way to go is wireless. They still make some wired sensors, but the caveat to those is that wire is only so long and it has to be hung close enough to your controller. The key is that sensor needs to have a clear shot of the sky. So if your wire's not long enough to get there, these wireless sensors, they've got about a 300-foot range. So for most people on the average yard, you can put it just about anywhere you want to.
You just have to monitor the battery, it'll be better.
You have to monitor the battery. The one downside, and this is a robust sensor, the one thing I don't love about Hunter is they have a maintenance-free battery inside of it, which means you can't replace it. Basically, they've potted it in epoxy. The next slide here is a Rainbird wireless frame-free sensor, which is my preference, and I install Hunter controllers. The reason why I like Rainbird better is there is a trap door on the bottom. Any of y'all want to come up here and look at it, this is that sensor. I have the battery department out, but there's a battery that's completely replaceable for you in the bottom of this. It's a real
3024?
2023. CR 2023.
2023.
Yeah.
It's like a little flat watch battery.
A common size you can find at Walmart. And that battery's good for 3 to 5 years. And then you replace that battery and you're good for another 3 to 5 years. I think Hunter's contention would be that once a sensor's been hanging outside for 10 to 15 years, it probably needs to be replaced anyways. Hunter's battery, they claim, I had heard 10 years, you said less than that. I've seen them last 6 to 7 years, but that's the tail end of the life one.
I go off the warranty. Their Hunter's warranty is 5 years. After that, it's, for me, you can take them apart and look at them. They have little pieces of cork inside of it. So that cork over time will get debris and wear out to where it's not going to function like it should.
Anybody wants to come up, I'll leave this out, but yeah, it's a very simple device. And since the question probably will be asked, you can use a Rainbird sensor with a Hunter controller or a Toro controller. These controllers, all they have, if they're a newer controller, they're going to have sensor terminals on them, and they don't care what brand sensor's attached to it. You don't have to stick to one or the other. This is just some versions of wired ones, which I'm just going to skip over because I think that we've passed that technology at this point.
The length of the cord is 30 feet.
You knew it. Okay, 30 feet.
You got 30 feet to play with, and if it's longer than that, you can try to splice some speaker wire, but I wouldn't say do that because that signal has to get, it's 30 feet because that signal can only go so far from that actual sensor.
So we have arrived at the irrigation hands-on portion, which we'll kind of circle back around and answer some of those more direct questions. And if anybody has any further questions, feel free to ask. I just want to make sure that everybody leaves here tonight, maybe feels like that anything specific they had was answered. And at this portion, I'm going to kind of go through the slides, but I've got the notes, and I'm going to let Patrick kind of head up answering some of those questions. So let's see. What to look for in contractors when looking at putting in a new system?
Every city actually has a requirement list that a contractor must do and provide, not to the city, but also to you as a homeowner upon installation of that system. The state also has a list of required items that the contractor is supposed to provide to you. Some people will go with a cheaper contractor that may not provide those, and they're okay with that, but all in all, they do have to provide specific items for you, but that is up to the contractor, the city, so they have to pull a permit because they are going to be tapping into the main line. They should provide you with a design, everything, once it is installed, they have to call in for it. It is inspected by the city for completion for that permit to be given the green tag.
So if you switch out some of your zones to drip irrigation.
Not required permit.
Yeah, and in the state of Texas, they allow homeowners a lot of liberty to do what they feel is right on their property. So you're more than welcome to do that work or have someone do it for you. But yeah, once the basic system's in, it's in. But I would really stress that if you do hire an irrigator to have a system put in, that you get that as-built. They are supposed to provide you, that design he was talking about is called an as-built. That's gonna show where your valves and your pipe is all laid. They should also provide a guide on a rough idea on how to program and set that controller for run times. And they should also really show you how to operate all of, any maintenance function of the system. They need to walk through that with you. Licensed irrigators are obligated to do that, so that's why it's important to go with them.
So we ought to make sure they're licensed, okay, Cam?
Yes.
Well, and any licensed irrigator, the first thing you should look at when they pull up in their truck, Patrick has one on his, I have one on mine. The license number, just like chemical applicators or plumbers, that license number is gonna be right up on the front of the truck on that front fender. If they pull up in a blank truck with no license number on it, I would start asking questions. Cause even to pull the permit and provide the design in the city, in Grapevine, you have to be a licensed irrigator. So make sure they're not skipping at something.
And you can also, if you know their name, you can go to the TCEQ website. That's where we are licensed out of. Search that individual, and if they don't show up, they are not a licensed irrigator. So, we'll be looking at basic layout and design, common device locations, our spray heads and rotors. We have several that we can pass around that you can see yourself, and we can show you how to adjust it. Nozzles. I have 2 big boxes full of nozzles over here. They are the water efficient nozzles. That's what I used to put in before I sold my company. But everything that I put in was a WaterSense EPA certified device. So I really pushed conservation when I was running my company. The irrigation valves and basic repair on those, we have a valve up here. We don't have one taken apart, but they're they're not too tough to do. PVC solvent welding, like you said, at the very end, if you're interested, and we have time, we'll see if we can show a demonstration of it. Drip irrigation, it's basic layout and design, repair and maintenance on it, and then hydrozoning concept overview. So, right here, we have our basic wiring. It depends, so this one, you have 4 zones throughout your yard. There are gonna be 4 of those valves somewhere in your yard. They are possibly gonna be in a green lidded 6-inch round valve box. They could be, if it's an older home, they could just be buried, or they're in a coffee can, or there's so many different ways that in the past how people put those in, and just, it's amazing that we come upon.
We did have a valve location question. I can't recall who that was, how to find the valves in the yard.
So, with valve location, I guess there's 2 options. You can go to one of the distributors that we recommend. They may or may not have a valve locator for rent. You can rent it and try to find it yourself. It's not the easiest thing to do. I wouldn't say that I'm the best valve locator out there, but I've found every valve I've ever traced out. So, but your best bet, if you can't find it, or if you want it found, to call a professional and have them find it, because they will have the professional equipment, they will have everything that's needed to find those valves. So, yes, sir.
If you have a 6-zone irrigation system, will these valves be in 6 different locations, or?
Possible. They could be spread throughout the yard. They could be in what I would call a valve battery, which are in one big box, or they could be 6 boxes right next to each other. It all depends on who installed it, designed it. And if they're older homes, they're going to be spread throughout the yard. So.
Yeah, and when I used to install systems, typically that valve would be kind of equidistant in the center of the zone that it's running, or very close to. He talked about the valve battery. I call it a manifold, same thing. You're seeing that more commonly on newer systems where they'll put all the valves at one location, usually somewhere on the side of the house. The upside to that is everything's in one spot.
So, real quick on wiring, nowadays it is more or less on residential, they're using a multi-bundled cable. So you're gonna have several different colored wires in one bundle. Your white is your common that goes to every valve. Then you're gonna have a single strand of a different color going to the valves, so it completes a circuit. Blue wires, the master valve, I see more black, the black wire being the master valve.
Yeah, I do too. I probably need to modify that.
So, that would be great, but everybody would be confused in our industry with, it does happen. People will wire it however they feel like. And then, everything else, where it's gonna be, your rated free sensor receiver's gonna be next to your controller. Your sensor is actually somewhere on the fence line or on your house. There are flow sensors. If you have, it's a cool device. Not everybody's gonna have one or wanna put one in because of the cost, but that's gonna be located at the front of your system, right by your backflow device. And
I've seen one flow sensor in 1,500 evaluations last year. So,
was it in full?
I believe so.
I think I put in like 40 or 50 last year.
So most of y'all are not gonna have probably flow sensors. Basically, that is a sensor that communicates with your controller, senses if there is a leak, will send you alerts if it's a smart controller, and can control the master valve to shut your system down if you do have a leak. They're great. You see them all the time on commercial. They just haven't quite spanned that gap to residential yet.
They're getting there.
They're getting there.
Another quick question, the master valve on the beehives, because there is no master valve lead on a beehive, what do you do with that?
Well, there should be, it may be labeled P, or is this the one you have?
It is, yeah.
I'm not calling you a liar.
That's gonna be either a pump or,
The far left has got some auxiliary.
So that's gonna be your pump, P-U-M-P.
Okay.
Same, I wish they would label that pump or MV, but all that does is anytime you call on any of your other zones, it's gonna send 24 volts to that pump. The reason why they label it pump is for systems on a well or a pump, it sends 24 volts to a relay that then kicks the pump up.
like on these right here, it does say your P, pump, and master valve.
Okay.
They just label it like everything.
Great, thanks.
Spray heads and rotors or multi-strings, we have some examples of those over here. This is our rotor head. What it does is it provides a big stream. It sweeps back and forth. It takes anywhere from probably twice as long or even 3 times as long to get the same amount of water to the same area as a regular spray head. Y'all want me to pass these around so y'all can take a look at them? Anybody?
What was that statement you just made?
What?
I'd like to hear that statement again you just made.
How long that it takes for a rotor? About 2 to 3 times as long of run time. So like a quarter inch of precipitation or water coming out of a spray head is about 7 minutes.
So actually, that's represented here.
Yeah.
There's your precip rate on a conventional spray head versus a rotor
at about a ½ inch.
But a rotor can cover more area.
Yeah, that's, use a rotor because
Ding,
you've got
ding.
further area.
Yeah, it covers
So
larger.
a spray couldn't do that, you have to have 2 sprays to cover the same spot. They're in back where you started.
Not technically.
No?
So with a regular spray head, you could actually put a multi-stream on it. So it is like this right here. I have examples of nozzles. I'll show everybody if y'all want to come up here later. But you can put a multi-streamed nozzle on that can get up to 30 to 36 feet. Same amount of distance that a regular 3/4 inch rotor can do. So technology is wonderful.
And I would just add the multi.
Yes,
Just the heads.
yes.
Yeah, so the nozzle's just the part right on top. There's your nozzle, there's your filter. Most of these spray heads are pretty universal. Almost all spray heads are universal. There are some older Toro heads out there that are a little different. But I'll let you kind of go over how to clean that out and whatnot. But yeah, you can swap out a nozzle to any spray head you have.
And then, you know, there are different types of spray heads as well. This one right here was my favorite spray head. It is a dual pressure regulated check head. So this head right here, you can adjust either to a 30 PSI or 40 PSI, and in the bottom of it, it has a check. So if you are on a slope, what you're wanting to do is retain the water inside the system, because every time, without check heads, all that water runs out, and you have to refill it each time you turn it on. So a check head can actually save you probably in between 10 to 20 gallons per run if you have check heads, and so you don't have to refill that system each time. All it is a device in the bottom that is pressure, kind of like it's a check. It's kind of spring loaded, and it just keeps water from coming out the top.
So if you had like a regular zone, and let's say you had like maybe 5 heads in the zone, and I had some heads up here and a couple of heads that were down low down here, when the system shuts off, the water from the higher elevated heads
Everything
is
goes
gonna go
down
to the ones that are in the low area, and that's where your water goes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you wouldn't want to put necessarily the check heads on the top. You would want to put them at the bottom of the zone to retain any, that water. It just.
It saves water. I would also argue that it prevents nozzles from getting plugged up as much. So when you've got heads at different elevations and your lower heads are bleeding off water, in the meantime, your heads at the top of the slope are siphoning in air because you can't create a vacuum. So you can hear them sucking. And so if that head pops back down and you've got muddy water that head's sitting in, it's going to suck all that junk back down in, and all of that
junk's going to go to the lower heads.
go to the lower heads. Yeah.
So when you turn it on, your lower heads are all going to be clogged.
So I got a quick question.
Yes, yes.
So I've got one head that is out by a sidewalk, and there's constantly water, so it's leaking from somewhere. Is that more indicative of a valve issue?
Valve failure.
That's what I was afraid of.
And I've got a slide on valves. That's a pretty common. So the valve is what we call weeping. The diaphragm,
Yeah.
the diaphragm is not closed completely, and that just happens to be the lowest head on that zone. Yeah, if any of y'all have any heads at the bottom of the slope that are green and algae light, you may have a weeping valve. Nozzles, I'm gonna let him kind of talk about, you wanna do the adjustment and whatnot, but the only thing I would say is almost all manufacturers, so you're gonna have different radiuses available. This little adjustment screw right here is gonna be on all your major manufacturers to where you can kind of close down the flow of that nozzle. They're gonna come preset from the factory at 15, 12, 10, 8. They're gonna come at set radiuses. You can tweak that radius a little bit with an adjustment screw. What I would tell you though is don't put a 15-foot radius nozzle in a 5-foot space and then expect to try to crank it down. Try to get the appropriate size nozzle for the area you're covering. And then the little dashes there, and the only reason why I'm explaining this because it's hard to see in your hand, the little dashes indicate your direction of flow. So this is a 5-foot half. Those dashes indicate your half circle. So you can talk about kind of how to spin that around.
On adjustment, if you are, that hands-on, you want to be able to do this, this is probably the best little tool out there. So it is hard to get your nails under here and pull it up. This actually, you insert, you push it apart, it comes up. It also acts as to keep it up.
What do they call that?
It's just a little Rainbird nozzle tool.
I literally think they call it a pull-up tool on Amazon. So search Rainbird pull-up tool.
They're worth everything.
Yeah, they're 10 or 15 bucks. You can also do the same thing, except for the pull-up function, you do the same thing with a metal binder clip to keep those heads held up.
And the 1-inch metal binder clip. Anything smaller than that won't work really well. So with adjustment, so let's say you look at your yard and you have one of your nozzles and it's spraying more onto the sidewalk than actual yard. I see a lot of people, they just take the top part and they spin the nozzle in the direction. That is definitely not what you do, because you're loosening it up and it will actually keep turning. What you do is you just grab it by the neck and you can turn it. That does not break it. Do not be scared of that noise. That noise is the inside, there's a little set ring that when you're turning it, it stays in place. So one click, it's not gonna move. So you can grab it and turn it all the way around, back and forth. It's not gonna hurt.
And then all you'll do is turn that stem until those directional dashes are headed the direction you want to go. You can do that. That's what we call dry adjusting. Then the fun part starts. Put your bathing suit and flip-flops on and do a wet adjustment. So sometimes with rotors, as irrigators, we will adjust as finely as we can without turning the zone on. But there's sometimes gets to the point where you do need to kick it on and make some fine tuning, and you just got to be willing to get your socks wet.
Rotors on tuning is a little different. You can't just grab the neck and click it. If you grab this and start hearing clicking noise, you broke the rotor. So this actually has adjustments inside of it in the top to where you can change both the actual arc and spray direction there, and then as well as how far you can go. You can go from all the way down to 0 to a 360 radius on most rotors.
And then I would say up here,
well, it's kind of hard. Well, if you want to, we can show you later. But yeah, it's set. This one's set for a 180, but you can plus or minus off of it on one of them, and it'll increase or decrease. And Rainbird's set to the right.
So Rainbird so the Rainbird left side of the arc is set. So you have to actually turn the head to the point that the left side of the stop point for that left arc stops where you want it. And then what you're going to do is, it's hard to show, but it is clearly visible on top. There is a plus and minus, and that's what you're adding or subtracting from the right side arc. So you physically set the left side and then set the right side where you want it.
And as you can see from up here, there are a bunch of different spray patterns that you can get. What you want to do with your yard is, there are adjustable nozzles and they work, but they are the most abusive in water usage out there. What you want to do is you want to set everything on a fixed amount as possible. There are some, weird spots that you can't do a fixed nozzle for. That's when those actual adjustable nozzles should be used. They shouldn't be used across the whole yard because they use more water than any nozzle out there is the adjustable.
That's something else to ask an irrigator if you're looking at putting in a system. Ask them specifically, does this include fixed nozzles? I see a lot of irrigators using nothing but adjustables because they can keep a couple radiuses on their truck and do every arc they need to. But he and I are both in complete agreement that they're a bane. They are not good nozzles, except for in small applications.
Yes, and they don't like to stay where you set them. So over time, you may set it at a 90 degree, but they could either close or open full to where they're spraying where they should.
This is just kind of a breakdown of what the inside of this valve looks like. Main components of a valve are going to be your diaphragm and solenoid. Solenoid's on top, it's what gets the power from the controller. Most of your wiring issues, if it's not a broken wire, are probably going to be here at these wire connections at the valve. These should be waterproof wire connectors rated for direct burial. But after a system's been in the yard for 20, 30 years, these will get corroded. So if you've got valves that are not operating correctly, one thing, if you know where the valve location is, open that valve box up and maybe get some fresh wire nuts on there. If you pull the old ones off and that copper wire is green and corrosive, that may be an issue. The other thing is that diaphragm will fatigue over time. And that's where you will get either a zone that hangs open. So again, you leave for work in the morning, get back home at the end of the day, and that zone's still running. That could be a failed diaphragm. That could also be debris in the valve. But all of these valves have one thing in similar, and that is there's generally going to be what we call the bonnet on top and screws. Different numbers for different brands. Hunter only have 4. But basically removing those screws and taking that bonnet off will allow you to flush that valve out. And this bottom body section really doesn't experience much wear. So if you don't have a leak at the pipe, you may just be able to buy the same exact valve, take the guts out of it, put it in your valve that's in the ground, and virtually have a brand new valve. But that being said, if you are going to tackle replacing a valve, I highly recommend that you get that hole, whether it be a valve box. Sometimes I'll even dig the valve box up. You want to have everything cleared out around that valve, because as soon as you take that bonnet off, there is going to be a little bit of a flow of water. And what's going to happen is that water is going to mix with the mud in the hole, then it's going to end up back in the valve, and you're going to be basically mucking up the thing that you just flushed out. So getting everything open and as clear as possible and ready to pump, I think a homeowner can tackle that. But don't try taking the bonnet off of a valve that's halfway buried in the ground.
I think you would agree with me. My solution to my employees and to anybody is dig a bigger hole. If you haven't found your issue, keep on digging, dig a bigger hole. If you're gonna make a repair and you have just enough pipe like this right here, and it's barely enough room underneath, dig a bigger hole. It will save a lot of anxiety, stress, sometimes anger. It will help you out. So just, if you're gonna make a repair, expose it as much as possible. Dig a big enough hole to where you can complete a repair without having to get more dirt mixed in with your solvents and all that kind of business.
Yeah, and let's see, where are we at on time? Oh my, I want to get you all out of here in a timely manner. So on that note about dig a bigger hole, I will keep a tarp or a piece of carpet, or I used to have a tire flap off of a semi. It was great for this, but a spot that all that dirt you're digging out can go, whether that be a bucket or somewhere, so that way when you're done, it can nicely, easily be pulled back into the hole. I will also often have a spare 5-gallon bucket with water in it, so that if I am taking a valve apart and I need to rinse something off of it, swish it around real quick, or get my tools clean, I have the water there. Those are all things that are very helpful when you are excavating. Again, this will be sent to you, but these are just common failure modes that you will see with irrigation valves. We talked about them hanging open, weeping. If you've got heads at the lower elevation that are kind of dribbling water, it is a failed valve, not a failed head.
If it's not working, you can do a pretty quick diagnostic on it. If you understand a multimeter and how that works, you can do an ohm reading and a voltage reading on that solenoid to see if it could be a short, it could be a cut wire. So if you have understanding of how a multimeter works, it can make diagnosing it pretty quick.
Solvent welding. I will demonstrate this right at the end for anybody that's interested, but again, we're not gluing pipe together. That's an entirely different process. When we are done properly solvent welding, you in essence have one piece of PVC. You are applying a 2-part process. You're applying a primer that softens up that PVC and preps it and gets it ready for the cement itself. And then you are applying the cement. It's basically a chemical reaction in which once that cures and sets up, whether it be a fitting or another piece of pipe that you're conjoining, they are now in one piece of pipe. The main things, these are just bad examples of that. Both of these use far too much. I think with new irrigators and with homeowners, since you think you're gluing it, you think more is better. The main thing is you just want a nice clean application all the way around, both your fitting and the pipe that you're inserting. And also getting a quarter turn on that pipe when you're done so that everything gets spread correctly. But again, going back to what he said, before you even start cutting pipe and starting this process, get yourself a nice big open hole. Even get cleaned out underneath the pipe, because as soon as you cut that pipe, you're gonna get water draining into the hole. It's not gonna drain forever, but it's nice if you've got a spot underneath that pipe that water can drain to, instead of just bleeding back into the other side.
Dry fit it first too.
Yeah, you can dry fit. I mean, the guy that trained me put a measuring tape to everything, and there's nothing wrong with that. I've been doing it so long, I don't do that. I just do everything by eye. But you know, one handy thing on the pipe that it's just a trick. If it is up, they all have lettering like this. Those are great cut marks. Those are indicators as to where you can kind of keep line. Go ahead and cut. I'm gonna glue.
If you're using a pipe cutter like this, I don't recommend the ones that ratchet cut that go click, 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 because what is happening is you're putting pressure on that pipe and it starts to bend it, and you can possibly fracture that pipe up like this. A good pair of just regular cutters like this, it cuts very simply, and it doesn't take that much pressure.
Yeah, but is that easy to use when it's down in the hole and you can't get all the way around it?
You know your hole.
Thank you. You don't have to go that far on it. It just takes a little wiggle to get it started.
It's not like a copper
I
cutter.
thought you were charting it around each side of
No,
it.
I was just looking at it.
Hand saws will also, I keep hand saws sometimes. I'm kind of old school. I don't keep it. I just.
Oh, you just use the blade.
I just hold the blade, and you can use this as a handsaw blade, but you can use a handsaw to cut that PVC as well. If you're going to use a handsaw though, that's going to create a lot of burrs that you need to then kind of you need to break those off. Otherwise, those will end up getting into your filters and your heads and your nozzles. They'll get into your valves and start mucking things up. But it's completely feasible to cut that way.
If I may,
Yes.
any feedback on those sliding collars?
I didn't bring one. I've actually been using them, again, I've been doing this a long time. Slip fixes or quick fixes, they've been around forever. They've gotten better. I have no issue using them. There are some irrigators that absolutely hate them, and I don't know why. The main thing I will tell you, you will sometimes find at Home Depot, they still sell them, compression couplers. Do not use those.
Okay.
Our ground moves too much. That PVC moves too much. You'll go back to that same spot a few years later, and that pipe is completely pulled out of that compression fitting. The slip fixes have double O-rings inside, and they are a solvent weld them. They're a fitting that's solvent welded in. So I have no issue with them.
Thank you.
I just didn't happen to bring one today. That is my last slide, and I do have. So we had a question about drip conversions. I'm a huge proponent, especially on older systems, and we're getting to our last little bit here, of if you've got a bed zone that is already, if it's a spray zone, but it's consolidated all the bed space already. And let's say those sprays are completely obstructed by your shrubs, you're not getting uniform coverage in your bed. They make, Rainbird in particular makes a product called an 1800 Retro. It looks almost, well, it looks exactly like this spray head, but it doesn't pop up and spray. Inside the guts of it are a pressure reducer and a filter, and there will be an adapter for the top so that you can plug your drip line straight into it. What you do is cap off all the heads on that particular zone. It works great for beds. You can use drip line under turf, but on some of y'all's applications on older systems, an easy, approachable thing would be your front beds. They'll cap off, you can cap off all the heads in that zone with the exception of a couple locations. Use those 1800 Retros. And then drip line, the critical thing about drip line, you can see how uniform those rows are. I see even installers do a horrible job, licensed irrigators do a horrible job of drip line where they just kind of snake it through the bed, they wrap it around, they just put it wherever they think it needs to go. It is absolutely critical that if you do a drip conversion, that you have nice uniform rows, and on average those are going to be 12 to 14 inches apart. The drip line that's gonna be installed is, we call it subsurface drip line. What I typically intend by that is that you're going to put it at grade and assume for about 2 to 3 to 4 inches of mulch on top of that. But these have emitters embedded in the line every 12 to 18 inches. There's a whole variety of different application rates for these. And what they will do, they also have a check valve inside of them. I've actually got one cut open here. But it's not like soaker hose. Soaker hose is just a line with a bunch of holes in it, and you get a bunch of water at the beginning of the line and none at the tail end. That's not the case with subsurface drip line that's designed for irrigation.
Two questions on drip, please. It seems like I'm getting a lot of calcium buildup in the holes. Is that normal, or is there a cleaning process, or is that over the life of the water?
Yeah,
That's the water.
I would highly doubt you're seeing that calcium really build up in the side.
Okay.
What you're probably seeing is the calcification around the hole outside, that white powdery looking stuff.
Yes, sir.
That's real common. I don't think that, as long as you're looking at, if you can kind of do a due diligence and observe, I doubt that's impeding the flow. That's just deposits from our water. But there's actually a seal, there's a wiper seal in most of these that will keep that from happening inside.
And then I got tired of putting them together, so I started using a heat gun to heat up the hose. Okay, you guys laugh at it.
No, when you do drip line in the wintertime, it sucks. I've done hundreds of thousands of feet of drip line. It's hard on your hands. When, on a nice warm day, if you're gonna do drip line, I would pick a warm day and there you go, yep. You learned that from Mr. Richards.
No,
Where is that tool?
it's the cutters.
You can actually, so he has a barbed drip fitting,
Yeah.
and you can actually stick it in the back of those cutters and use that as an application tool.
Instead of trying to do it with your hand, you can use this to give you a little bit more leverage to push together.
Darn.
All right, we've got.
It was free, so well worth it.
Starting up old valves, we got about 10 minutes left. I want to get you out of here in time. I'm going to do a solvent weld for anybody who wants to see it. Patrick and I will stick around a little bit to kind of go through any tools or anything, and then we'll start packing up. But starting up old valves, that was a question here. Do you have a wire for that valve in your controller that you're aware of? If you pull the terminal off where your controller's at, is this, you have heads there, but is there a terminal on, like a station on your controller that's not currently being used? Okay, that would be the first start. Just make sure you have a wire from that valve, wherever the valve is, to the controller. Sometimes we will defer to, you may just need to hire a licensed irrigator, because what you need to be prepared for, like I said, if a valve has not been ran in a long time, those rubber diaphragms, if they're not exercised on occasion, get very rigid, and you could maybe it does fire off from the controller, maybe there is a wire that just needs to be hooked up. You could fire that off and then it may not shut back down. So just do your due diligence. If that happens, know where your shut off is at. But I think your situation may be complex enough that you might need to solicit the help of an expert. Beyond that, you can fix anything you'd like. But if it's not been a zone that's, well, and on top of that, if the valve is fine, you may get it to run, but you may find you've got 16 broken heads and a pipe leak, and just all irrigation systems do not do well when they sit idle.
It's only been like 3 or 4 years.
Okay, okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions real quick? Yes, sir.
I got it.
Go ahead.
It's automatic turn on, but it's not shutting off, just one zone.
It will turn on, but it won't shut off?
Yeah.
Talking about that diaphragm. If you don't know where that valve is, you might need to locate it. That's probably going to be a valve issue. So the power is being cut off to the valve, but the diaphragm itself is mechanically, physically not closing back. Is probably what's going on with that valve. And then I saw a hand back there.
Are you guys still working? Like you still got phones?
I'm gonna let him answer first. I am just an unbiased inspector for this program right now. I sold my business, so I am not out in the field currently.
Do you have recommendations of who to?
At the bottom of our evaluation, that if you have received one, if not, it's called the Green Pros certification. They are people that have shown that are taking that extra step to educate themselves, to be able to provide better information to you as a homeowner. And they go through, it's 6 half-day classes through the Texas A&M Agri-Life Department, and it's just, you know, it shows that irrigator is wanting to be more knowledgeable, to show you better ways to go about irrigation. That link, I think, can be found on that SaveMyWater.com website, that Green Pros directory. And I think there's a
system and they just put it in any old way. Like,
Yeah.
You know, like I don't know what it is.
No, I mean, a lot of those guys are kind of my peers, his peers. They've been doing this 10, 15 years, and they've taken a vested interest in trying to learn better, more water conservation ways of doing things. I can't speak to what all they all cost, but I will say that is probably the best list you can start with, is look for that Green Pros directory on that SaveMyWater.com website.
So we can sign up and have someone come and inspect our
You
irrigation
certainly
system?
can, and you can do that on the same,
Free.
yes, it's at no charge to you. We don't say free, it is a no-charge service. So we are independent contractors, we are paid, but it is basically, it's the water conservation dollars, the budget that each of these cities set aside each year, that it goes towards paying for that.
So can an average homeowner do a drip irrigation in their flower, in their beds?
I think so. Yeah.
You could do a drip irrigation and this, you could do the two off the same,
Spray and drip on the same zone? No.
not the same zone,
No.
but have different zones doing that.
Yes,
Of the
yes,
same
yes.
system.
Okay. Well, I think that's it. I'm gonna do a solvent weld up here real quick while Patrick and I kind of pack up.
I want everybody to get their pens out, because we're gonna have a test now. We're gonna have an
How many inches of water does a
irrigation.
rotor do over a half hour compared to if it's windy?
Yeah. These guys are pretty smart.